Thank you. The next one is Stephen Howard, Keep Our Assets, Canterbury.
Kia ora.
Welcome.
He au mihi ki ngā tangata e hui mai nei tēnei rā. My name's Stephen Howard, with me is John Minto. We're from Koa. Koa is a mix of individuals and groups committed to the retention of assets in public hands, the very opposite of the neoliberal drive to privatise and diminish public goods. Our major concern is that the privatisation of public and common goods is a threat to democracy and generally efficient economics. It's very pleasing to see in the note that the council sent that everyone's read all the submissions, which is contrary to the recent report in the press by one councillor saying he doesn't bother to read all the submissions. A few years ago, we were confronted with the Cameron report. The one point it made that made any sense was that the strategies of the assets in CCHL should be more closely aligned with the council's aspirations. And so the council needs to be much more directly involved with those assets. We keep seeing problems in other cities driven by PPP model or delivery of public transport. Wellington, Dunedin and Auckland have all faced problems. The council needs to take the reins and run with it directly. Julianne Gent has said in a private conversation that she thought they'd changed the operating model for public transport in the ministry, but they obviously haven't. But it's time for the council and ECAN to work together to make that change. The council also needs to have more direct control of the airport assets and the port. The Terrace fiasco and the safety problems at the ports, both ours and Auckland, illustrate a strong case for more direct public control. It's clear that the biggest challenge facing our city, and in fact the globe, is the changes coming from climate change. COVID is nothing compared. So it's very important that the council has more direct control of both assets and of the public service. Thank you. John's going to say a couple of words now.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Look, I wanted to draw your attention to two things. First one is on page 3 of our submission, where there's a little graph there. And this is a graph which we believe solves the major problem, major obstacle to having free public transport here in Christchurch. We've just come from a meeting with ECAN where we were talking about this issue, and I want to make sure that councillors really understand this little graph here. So it's comparing Auckland and Canterbury in terms of the amount of in terms of how the split is between public transport and state highways in terms of government funding, right? So in Auckland, for example, Auckland is the black bars. So in Auckland, public transport per capita is funded at almost $1,300, whereas the state highway improvements is down at just a bit less than $600. In other words, there's a 2-to-1 bias in favour of public transport in Auckland. But if you look at the Canterbury graph, that's the red bars, for public transport we've got less than $300 per capita, whereas for state highway improvements it's way up at $900 per capita. In other words, we've got a 3-to-1 split in favour of roads over public transport. So our argument is this, that the council with ECAN need to be renegotiating with Waka Kotahi the split in terms of public transport and regional roads funding. If Christchurch had the Auckland split, we would have the ability to have free public transport right across the region from Rangiora down to Littleton, out to Darfield, out to Rolleston, that whole area, free public transport with enough investment to provide low emissions electric buses. I mean, China's got 800,000 electric buses. I think we've got one in Christchurch maybe. We need a couple of hundred of those. So we're not talking about old diesel buses chugging around the streets. We're talking about a real investment in high quality public transport. 53% of our greenhouse gas emissions in Christchurch City is from transport. we could make a huge dent in that with free public transport. So I hope that graph shows us the way we can do it without having increases in rates or taxes. And the last point is to do with the proposal to have charging for excess water use. We've put an OIA request in for information which would tease out the impact this would have on low-income families in Christchurch. We haven't had the results of that back, despite it being over a month, and we're hoping that. So when we receive that, we'll send that around councillors. But it seems to me that the information isn't there for the council to say no, this is not going to have any significant impact. If you read our submission, we're talking about, Christchurch is a garden city. We've invested quite a bit of that in terms of the city's image. I think what would be the economic impact here if Christchurch became known as the desert city rather than the garden city, because the whole east coast with climate change is going to have a lot less rainfall, and the council shouldn't be putting the burden of that onto people who keep beautiful gardens. Kia ora.
Kia ora, and thank you very much. It's come to the end of the time, so thank you for your contribution. Next is